The silence in the courtroom was heavier than a stone. The only sound had been the recording, but now it was over, leaving a terrible echo in its place. The judge, a woman in her 60s with eyes that had seen everything, stared at the small audio player on her desk as if it were a venomous snake. Her hand was pressed over her mouth, her expression one of pure, undiluted shock. No one moved. No one breathed. The recording had painted a picture more vivid than any testimony. It had started with a man's angry shout, sharp and cruel in the quiet of the morning. "Get up and make breakfast for my parents." Then the sound of a woman's weak, breathless voice. "Paul, please, I don't feel well." It was followed by the mocking laughter of an older man and woman. A younger woman's voice muttered, clear as day, "Serves her right." The recording captured the sounds of pained shuffling, a sob, and then a sudden, heavy crash. After that, there was only silence, a deep, chilling silence that stretched on for what felt like an eternity. That silence was the most damning part of all. My gaze drifted from the judge to my husband, Paul, sitting across the aisle. His face was as white as a sheet. For the first time, his mask of charming confidence was gone, replaced by raw, ugly fear. My mind flew back to that morning. The memory was burned into me. It started with the jarring shout at 5 a.m. Paul was standing over our bed, already dressed, his face twisted in a sneer. I was 8 months pregnant, a huge, aching weight in my belly. My ankles were so swollen they looked like they belonged to someone else. And a dull headache had been pounding behind my eyes for days. "Did you hear me?" he spat. "My parents are awake. They want a full English breakfast, now." I tried to push myself up, but my body felt like it was made of lead. "Paul, I can't," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "I feel so dizzy. Please." He just scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound. From the living room I heard his father's loud, booming laugh. "Is the little princess refusing her duties?" his mother called out, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Tears pricked my eyes as I swung my legs over the side of the bed. Each movement was a struggle, and a sharp pain shot up my back. As I shuffled past the living room on my way to the kitchen, I saw his sister Chloe curled up on the sofa with her phone. She looked up at me, a smirk on her face, and muttered just loud enough for me to hear, "Serves her right." The kitchen felt a million miles away. My hands trembled as I reached for a heavy frying pan from the hook. The headache was getting worse, a sharp, pulsing pain now that made spots dance in my vision. I leaned against the cool granite of the counter, trying to catch my breath. A wave of nausea and cold sweat washed over me. I knew with a terrifying certainty that something was very wrong. My baby. I had to protect my baby. My phone was in the deep pocket of my dressing gown. With hands that shook so badly I could barely control them, I pulled it out. Hiding my body behind the kitchen counter so they couldn't see me from the living room, I fumbled to open my messages. My fingers hovered over the screen. One text. A simple code I had arranged with the only person in the world I trusted. My silent SOS. I typed the 4 simple words, "The teapot is boiling," and I hit send. A moment later, a sharp, blinding pain exploded behind my eyes. The room tilted violently. The edges of my vision turned dark, tunneling inward until there was nothing left. The last thing I heard was the loud metallic clatter of the pan as it slipped from my grasp and hit the tile floor. Then, everything went black. It's hard to remember the man he was at the beginning, because he seems like a completely different person from the monster he became. The Paul I first met was like a prince from a storybook. He walked into the little bookstore where I was working part-time, his smile so warm and genuine it could melt ice. I was an orphan. My parents had died in a car crash when I was young, leaving me with a quiet life and a small trust fund that meant I never had to worry about money. But more than money, I just wanted a family. I was lonely. Paul saw that loneliness in me, and he filled it completely. He was charming, handsome, and so attentive. He would remember tiny things I'd told him weeks before, like my favorite kind of flower or a book I'd mentioned wanting to read. He would show up at the bookstore with a single daisy or a copy of the book just for me. I had never had anyone care for me like that. I fell for him fast and hard. When he introduced me to his family, the Crofts, I was intimidated. They lived in a huge, sprawling mansion that looked like something from a magazine. It was all white marble, polished wood, and enormous paintings. His parents, Mr. and Mrs. Croft, were polite, but distant. They were polite in the way that very wealthy people are to the staff. "Oh, Nora," Mrs. Croft had said during our first dinner, patting my hand with her cool, dry fingers. "It's so refreshing to meet someone from such a simple background. You're very sweet." The little pause before the word refreshing felt like a small sting, but I told myself I was just being sensitive. I was so desperate to be liked, to finally belong somewhere. There were other small signs, little red flags I chose to ignore. Once we were at a fancy restaurant and the waiter accidentally brought Paul the wrong drink. Paul's smile vanished instantly, his voice turned as cold as ice. "Is it that difficult to do your job correctly?" he asked the young waiter, who turned pale and started stammering an apology. A moment later, Paul turned back to me, his warm smile returning as if nothing had happened. "I'm sorry you had to see that, my love," he said, squeezing my hand. "I just expect perfection for you." At the time, I thought it was romantic that he wanted everything to be perfect for me. I didn't see it for what it was, a glimpse of the cruel, entitled man hiding underneath. We had a whirlwind romance. He proposed 6 months after we met, and we were married in a beautiful ceremony in his parents' garden. I felt like I was living a dream. I finally had a family. I was Mrs. Nora Croft. The little cracks were still there, his mother's backhanded compliments, his father's disinterest, his sister Chloe's jealous glares, but I ignored them. Then 2 pink lines on a little plastic stick changed everything. I was pregnant. I was so overjoyed I was shaking. I waited for Paul to come home from work and showed him the test, my heart pounding with excitement. He lifted me up and spun me around, his laughter echoing in our big, empty house. "A baby!" he cheered. "A Croft heir! My parents will be thrilled!" Holding on to him, with my feet off the ground, I felt a wave of pure, undiluted hope. All my worries melted away. A baby. This was the answer. A baby would bring us all closer. It would melt his parents' icy exteriors. It would make Paul even more loving and protective. This baby would be the glue that held my new family together forever. This baby would make us a real family. The idea to move into a wing of the Croft estate seemed so perfect at first. The pregnancy was hard on me, and Paul presented it as the most loving gesture imaginable. "My love," he'd said, stroking my hair. "You shouldn't be alone all day. At the main house my mother can look after you. You won't have to lift a finger." Desperate for a real family and exhausted from the constant nausea, I agreed. I packed my life into boxes, believing I was moving into a circle of love and care. I was wrong. I was moving into a cage. A beautiful, gilded cage, but a cage all the same. The promises of being taken care of vanished the moment the last box was unpacked. The wing of the house was beautiful, but it was also isolated. And I wasn't treated like a daughter-in-law expecting the family's first grandchild. I was treated like the help. Mrs. Croft would leave lists of chores for me, saying it was good for me to stay active. Paul, who once couldn't do enough for me, now expected me to wait on him hand and foot. Then came the money. Paul brought it up one evening, his tone smooth and reasonable. "Nora, darling, with the baby coming, we should really combine our finances. It's easier if I manage your trust fund along with ours. It's for the baby's future," he'd said. It sounded so responsible. I trusted him. I signed the papers he put in front of me. Soon after, my bank cards were gone, replaced with a small allowance he'd give me in cash each week. I had to ask my own husband for my own money, and was often told I was being frivolous for wanting to buy something as simple as a new book. My isolation grew. When my best friend Zoe called, Paul would often answer my phone. "She's resting," he'd say briskly before hanging up. He told me my friends were a bad influence, that they didn't understand the pressures of our new life. Slowly, He cut every string that connected me to my old world, until the only people I saw were him and his family. His family's criticism became constant and open. "Nora, dear, that dress is a bit simple. For a Croft, isn't it?" his mother would comment, looking me up and down with disdain. His father barely spoke to me at all, looking right through me as if I were a ghost. Chloe, his sister, found new ways to make me miserable every day. My favorite book would go missing, only to be found days later with a page torn. A cup of juice would accidentally spill on the one comfortable maternity dress I owned. They were small, petty torments designed to wear me down. The final illusion of a happy family shattered one Sunday afternoon. I was in the worst throes of morning sickness, unable to even lift my head from the pillow. Downstairs, I could smell Chloe cooking a huge Sunday roast, her favorite meal. The smell made me sick, but I was also starving. I drifted off to sleep, dreaming of the food I would eat when the nausea finally passed. Hours later, feeling a bit better, I made my way downstairs. The house was quiet. I walked into the kitchen, my stomach rumbling with hunger. The kitchen was spotless, too spotless. The roasting pan was washed and put away. The serving platters were clean. I opened the fridge, hoping for a plate of leftovers. There wasn't a single plate, not a scrap of meat, not even a leftover potato. They had eaten the entire meal and cleaned everything up, leaving nothing for me. I found Paul in the study, reading the paper. "Paul?" I asked, my voice small. "Was there any dinner left?" "I'm feeling better now and I'm so hungry." He didn't even look up from his paper. "You should have come down when it was served," he said coldly. "Chloe worked hard on that meal." "But I was sick," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. He finally looked at me then, his eyes cold and hard. "Well, maybe if you weren't so lazy and spent all day in bed, you would have been on time for dinner." I had become a prisoner. That cold, empty kitchen, with not a single scrap of food left for the pregnant woman upstairs, was my wake-up call. I wasn't part of the family. I was a problem they had to manage. They didn't care about me, and I started to fear they didn't really care about my baby either. I was trapped, with no money of my own and no one to talk to. My health was getting worse. I was constantly tired, my head ached, and my body felt weak. Fear, cold and sharp, began to grow in my heart. It wasn't just fear for myself anymore, but for the tiny, innocent life growing inside me. I had to do something. I had to escape. But how? My phone was monitored, my comings and goings were watched, and I had no access to my own money. I lay awake night after night, my mind racing, until I remembered him. Mr. Harrison. He had been my father's best friend and his lawyer, a kind, white-haired man who had always sent me a card on my birthday. After my parents died, he had managed my trust fund until I turned 25. He had always told me, "If you ever need anything, Nora, anything at all, you call me." Getting to a phone in private was almost impossible. My chance came a week later. Paul sent me to the local village to pick up some dry cleaning, giving me exactly $20 in cash. He thought it was a simple chore. For me, it was a lifeline. I picked up the dry cleaning, which cost $18, leaving me with $2. It wasn't enough for a taxi or a bus, but it was enough for a phone call. I found a dusty old payphone at the back of a convenience store. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial the number for his office, a number I had memorized from years of birthday cards. His secretary answered, but I insisted on speaking to him directly. "Tell him it's Nora," I whispered. "It's an emergency." When Mr. Harrison's warm, kind voice came on the line, I burst into tears. I told him everything, the words tumbling out in a rushed, terrified whisper. The money, the isolation, the cruelty, my fear for my baby. He listened patiently, his silence a comforting presence. "Stay calm, Nora," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "We're going to get you out of there, but we have to be smart. We need proof of what's happening." We arranged a secret meeting. The next week I told Paul I had a routine doctor's appointment. He let me go, but only after checking the appointment time with the clinic himself. Mr. Harrison met me in a small coffee shop 2 blocks from the doctor's office. The moment he saw me, his kind face fell. I had lost so much weight, and I knew there were dark circles under my eyes. He didn't waste any time. He pushed a small, plain-looking keychain across the table. "This is a high-fidelity audio recorder," he explained quietly. "Keep it with you at all times. I've also set up an emergency protocol. If you are ever in immediate danger, I want you to send me a text message. Just 4 words, 'The teapot is boiling.' The moment I receive that text, I will remotely activate the recorder on this keychain, and I will dispatch emergency services to your location immediately. Do you understand?" I nodded, clutching the small keychain in my hand. It felt heavier than a brick. It felt like hope. I made it back to the house with minutes to spare. That night, feeling a tiny spark of courage for the first time in months, I hid the keychain on the ring with my single house key. I was no longer completely powerless. A week later, Paul came home from work with a wide smile. "Great news, my love," he announced. "My parents and Chloe are so worried about you in your final weeks. They've decided to come and stay for the next month to help out." His words hit me like a physical blow. A month, a whole month of their constant presence, their sneers, their cruelty. My hand instinctively went to the keychain in my pocket. A deep, cold sense of dread washed over me. The storm was coming. The storm arrived, and it was worse than I could have ever imagined. The Crofts had been in the house for 2 days, and it felt like 2 years. Their presence suffocated me. They filled the grand house with their loud, arrogant voices, their cold laughter, and their constant biting criticisms. I was their servant, their scapegoat, their entertainment. Mrs. Croft would accidentally knock over a glass of water and watch with a smirk as I struggled to clean it up on my hands and knees, my huge belly making it almost impossible. Mr. Croft would demand I fetch him things from the other side of the house, knowing how much each step pained me. Chloe would follow me from room to room, making little comments just loud enough for me to hear about how fat I was getting, how tired I looked, how useless I was. Paul, my husband, did nothing. He basked in his family's presence, joining in their cruel games. He was their prince, and they were his loyal court. I was just the court jester, a pathetic figure to be mocked. The morning it happened, I had barely slept. My headache had become a relentless pounding drum behind my eyes. I felt sick and dizzy, and every joint in my body ached. I was just drifting into a fitful sleep when Paul's harsh shout ripped me from the darkness. It was 5 a.m. "Get up and make breakfast for my parents!" He was standing over me, his face a mask of irritation. "They're early risers," he snapped, as if that explained everything. "They want a full English breakfast. Now, don't be lazy." Every part of me screamed in protest. I tried to push myself up, a wave of dizziness making the room spin. "Paul, please," I whispered, my voice hoarse and weak. "I don't feel well. I really don't think I can stand for that long." He rolled his eyes. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Nora. You're pregnant, not dying." From the living room, I heard his father's loud, booming laugh. "Is the little princess refusing her duties?" his mother called out, her voice dripping with amusement. "Some of us have been up for an hour already." Tears of helplessness and rage pricked my eyes. Slowly, painfully, I swung my legs over the side of the bed. My feet, swollen and puffy, protested as they hit the cold floor. Each step towards the kitchen was a new kind of torture. My back seized with a sharp pain, and I had to pause, gripping the wall for support. As I shuffled past the living room, a ghost in my own home, I saw Chloe curled up on the sofa, the light from her phone illuminating her smug face. She looked up at me, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "Serves her right," she muttered to her phone, before turning her attention back to her screen. The bright lights of the kitchen felt like daggers in my eyes. The headache was getting worse, a sharp, pulsing pain that seemed to be squeezing my brain. I leaned against the cool granite of the counter, trying to catch my breath, trying to stop the room from spinning. A wave of nausea so strong it made my knees buckle washed over me. I knew with a terrifying certainty that something was very wrong. This wasn't just pregnancy. This was danger. My baby. I had to protect my baby. My phone was in the deep pocket of my dressing gown. My salvation was right there. With hands that shook so badly I could barely control them, I pulled it out. Hiding my body behind the kitchen island so they couldn't see me, I fumbled to open my messages to Mr. Harrison. My fingers hovered over the screen. I typed the 4 simple words, the code that meant everything. The teapot is boiling. My thumb trembled as I hit send. A moment later, a sharp, blinding pain exploded behind my eyes, more intense than anything I had ever felt. The room didn't just spin, it tilted violently like a ship in a storm. The edges of my vision turned dark, a black tunnel closing in until there was nothing left. The last thing I heard was the loud, metallic clatter of the frying pan as it slipped from my grasp and hit the hard tile floor. Then everything went completely, terrifyingly black. I wasn't completely gone. I was floating in a dark, fuzzy world, somewhere between sleep and consciousness. My body was on the cold, hard kitchen floor, but my mind was a million miles away. I could hear voices, but they were distorted and distant, like listening to a radio underwater. They were arguing. "Look at this mess!" That was Paul's voice, sharp with annoyance. "She's done this on purpose, just for attention. Now who is going to make breakfast?" "Honestly, the drama," Mrs. Croft chimed in, her voice dripping with disdain. "She's probably fine, just wants us to feel sorry for her. Let her lie there for a bit. She'll get up when she's hungry." "Pathetic," Chloe muttered. "She can't handle anything." Not one of them came to me. Not one of them knelt down to check if I was breathing. Not one of them called my name. I was a problem, an inconvenience, a mess on the floor that was delaying their meal. I tried to move, to speak, to tell them something was wrong, but my limbs were made of lead and my throat was closed. I could only lie there, a silent observer of their cruelty, trapped in the darkness. Then a new sound cut through the fog. It started as a faint wail in the distance, but it grew louder and louder, closer and closer. It was a sound that made my heart, which I thought had stopped beating, give a hopeful flutter. It was the sound of sirens. "What is that?" Mr. Croft asked, his voice suddenly laced with confusion. The arguing stopped. The house fell silent except for the escalating scream of the approaching vehicles. Then, red and blue lights began to flash through the kitchen windows, painting the walls in frantic, pulsing colors. The lights illuminated their faces, no longer smug and arrogant, but shocked and confused. There was a loud, forceful banging on the front door. "Paramedics! Police! Open the door!" a man's voice shouted. I heard Paul stammering, "What on earth is going on?" as he went to the door. The moment he opened it, 2 paramedics in uniform and 2 police officers rushed past him, their faces serious and focused. They had been told where to go. They came straight to the kitchen. One of the paramedics, a kind-faced woman, was at my side in an instant. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" she asked, her voice calm and professional. She gently felt for the pulse in my neck. The other paramedic was already cutting open my sleeve to wrap a blood pressure cuff around my arm. "Her pulse is rapid and thready," the woman said. The cuff on my arm tightened and then hissed as it deflated. The male paramedic looked at the reading on his machine and his eyes went wide. "Her pressure is through the roof. It's 200 over 110. She's in a hypertensive crisis. We need to move now." He looked up from me and stared directly at Paul, who was standing in the doorway with his parents and sister huddled behind him like frightened rats. The paramedic's professional calm vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "She's 8 months pregnant and her blood pressure is at a stroke level," he said, his voice cold and hard. "She could have died. Her baby could have died. Why didn't you call 911? Paul just stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no words came out. He had no answer. For the first time in his life, the charming, powerful Paul Croft was utterly and completely speechless. As they carefully lifted me onto a stretcher, the last thing I saw was the 4 of them, bathed in the flashing police lights, their faces a perfect picture of guilt and terror. The trap had sprung. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, a heavy blanket that smothered every breath. The recording was over, but the ugly sound still echoed in my mind. Paul's furious scream, his mother's mocking laughter, the sickening thud of my body hitting the floor. I looked across the aisle at them. Paul was ghost white, his jaw slack with disbelief. His parents stared at the floor. Their arrogant masks finally shattered, leaving behind nothing but ugly, exposed guilt. Chloe was actually crying, not out of pity for me, but out of pure terror for herself. My lawyer, Mr. Harrison, let the silence hang in the air for a long moment before he spoke. His voice was calm and steady. "Your Honor," he said, "what you have just heard is the sound of deliberate, malicious cruelty, and what you heard next, the silence, is the sound of criminal negligence." He walked to his table and picked up another file. While my client lay unconscious on the floor, her life and the life of her unborn child in grave danger, the Croft family did nothing. They did not call for help. As the recording proves, they were more concerned about their delayed breakfast. He opened the new file and placed it on the judge's bench. "This is the report from the paramedics and the emergency room doctors. It states that my client, Nora, was suffering from severe stress-induced preeclampsia. Her blood pressure was at a level that could have caused a fatal stroke. The doctors are clear. The direct cause of this life-threatening condition was the extreme and prolonged emotional distress she was subjected to in that house. Their neglect in that moment could have killed her." The judge slowly lifted her head. She took off her glasses and carefully cleaned them, her movements slow and deliberate. When she put them back on, her eyes were like chips of ice. She stared at Paul, at his parents, and at his sister, one by one, holding their gaze until they flinched and looked away. Her face, which had been a mask of shock, now settled into an expression of cold, quiet fury. It was a look of utter contempt. She finally spoke, her voice quiet but ringing with an authority that made the air crackle. "Mr. Croft, Mrs. Croft, Chloe Croft, please stand." They rose slowly, their movements stiff and clumsy. They looked like puppets whose strings had been cut. "I have been a judge for 30 years, she said, her voice low and dangerous. "I have seen the worst of people, but rarely have I witnessed such a calculated, venomous cruelty, especially towards a pregnant woman who was supposed to be a member of your family." She took a deep breath. "Therefore, the court orders the following, effective immediately. 1. The divorce is granted. 2. Ms. Nora Harrison is awarded full, sole, and permanent custody of her child. 3. A permanent restraining order is issued. None of you are to come within 500 feet of Ms. Harrison or her child for the rest of your lives. And 4, she added, her eyes narrowing, this court is forwarding this recording and all medical evidence to the district attorney's office. You will be facing a criminal investigation for felony endangerment and abuse." She slammed her gavel down once. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. "We are done here." 6 months later, I sat in a comfortable rocking chair in my own sunny apartment. The afternoon light streamed through the clean windows, warming my face. In my arms, my beautiful, healthy baby girl, Lily, was sleeping soundly, her tiny chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. She smelled like milk and sunshine. My new life was quiet. It was simple, and it was mine. The grand, cold mansion was a distant nightmare. Paul and his family were ghosts from another life. After the criminal charges were filed, they had sold their house and moved away in disgrace, their power and influence revealed to be nothing but a fragile illusion. I leaned my head back, listening to the gentle sounds of my new world, the soft coo Lily made in her sleep, the distant hum of traffic, the cheerful chirping of birds outside my window. For the first time since I could remember, I felt completely safe. I was no longer a lonely orphan looking for a family. I had a family. It was just the two of us, my daughter and me, and we were more than enough. I closed my eyes, a soft smile on my face, and just rocked, holding my whole world in my arms. I was home.